Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, November 14th, 2022, and nearly 1 week after some of the most insane midterm election results that we have seen in the past 20 years plus, the state of Georgia is still at a runoff place where in about a month from now, we will be heading full force and full swing into the December 6th runoff election between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. Now, the state of the race as is that neither candidate was able to reach over 50% of the vote. Warnock received 49.4%, Walker received 48.5%, and the Libertarian candidate, Chase Oliver, received 2.1%. Now, with this runoff election heading into December, the Democratic Party is on track for victory here for a number of reasons. On the surface level, we would assume that because the Democrats already have Senate control, that maybe they wouldn't be too excited to turn out in this midterm election. However, I think there are a number of other factors that really enhanced Herschel Walker's numbers this time around that I do not think he will share nor enjoy by the time we reach about a month from now on December 6th. Now, on the very broad front, on the national front, the Democratic Party did very well last Tuesday. They flipped Pennsylvania, they won in New Hampshire, they won in Colorado, Nevada, Arizona, and Washington, all states that the Republican Party was targeting, at least from Mitch McConnell's standpoint and Rick Scott's standpoint. These are the two most powerful men when it comes down to control of the U.S. Senate on the Republican side. They run individual PACs. Rick Scott runs the NRSC, the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Mitch McConnell runs the Senate Leadership Fund. Both of them are GOP super PACs that are focused on electing and re-electing Republicans across this country, all of them invested in those 5 states that I had mentioned, and Democrats ultimately ended up winning. But with those victories, it gave the Democratic Party the majority outright. Democrats will be in power no matter what happens in Georgia for the next 2 years. And that's why I say on at least one front, you might be able to take that and arrive at the conclusion that Georgia will not matter to Democrats, that Democrats will not turn down that race. But I will say that I do not think that will be the case, especially given the outcome of this election. Knowing that the Democratic Party did so well in these midterm elections, despite everybody saying that the Republicans were going to win, Democrats, quite frankly, did not seem like they had much to be enthusiastic about. Beyond Roe v. Wade, the Democratic Party did not seem to have a hot-button issue as big as the issue of the economy, as the issue of inflation. And the majority of voters very much viewed inflation and the economy as one of some of their top issues when it came down to how they voted at the ballot box. But ultimately, Democrats pulled ahead in the states that mattered, in the districts that mattered, and when it comes down to Senate control, the Democrats have it. But the Republican Party, again, was starting out with such a large advantage that Democrats truly did not have much to cling on to. We were saying time and time again that Republicans were on track to easily win the House, didn't happen, and potentially easily win the Senate, which absolutely will not happen, right? The House is still a toss-up. The Senate elections are solidified. Democrats will more than likely be gaining seats when it comes down to the state of Georgia. But even just beyond levels of enthusiasm that the GOP definitely should have had that they ultimately, clearly, did not have, the Democratic Party also gets to enjoy a ballot that just pits Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock against one another. And what I mean by that is, it puts the Democratic Party in a much better position than when they were running on the same ballot as Governor Brian Kemp. When Brian Kemp was on that ballot in the governor's race in the state of Georgia, he won that race by a pretty significant amount. In the state itself, you can see that he won by about 8 points across the state, despite 2018, him winning by just 1.2%. Brian Kemp's victory in 2018 looked like child's play to his 2022 victory. Brian Kemp, quite frankly, significantly outperformed Herschel Walker, avoided a runoff election, and easily won the governorship. But the Senate race, that's an entirely different story. But we cannot deny that Brian Kemp 1,000% helped Herschel Walker. Because Brian Kemp was the top ticket Republican that was on the ballot these midterm elections in the state of Georgia. Voters were hyper-fixated on both of these races, but when they know they're solidified for Brian Kemp, it makes them much more willing to vote for Republicans down ballot. You see that to be the effect with the presidential race, or in midterm elections, again, with the gubernatorial race, or the Senate race. You find that in Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro's victory of 15 points, 100% helped John Fetterman win by 5 points. John Fetterman would not have won by 5 points if Josh Shapiro had been losing in the governor's race, or Josh Shapiro had only won the governor's race by 5 points. The delta was established, and the question was, how much does the top ticket, how much does the best performing Republican, perform, or Democrat perform, and then you apply that delta. Because we found it in the results of the polling. Brian Kemp would lead by 8, and amongst the same electorate, Herschel Walker would lead by 1. Brian Kemp would lead by 8, and Herschel Walker would lead by 1. That delta, 7 points, nearly translated identically to what we saw here. The difference in margin, about 7.6%. You head back over to the Senate race. What was the margin between Warnock and Walker? About 1 percentage point. You're talking about an 8-point delta that is very similar to the 7-point delta that we saw in the polling data going into election night. So again, depending on how that top ticket, that number one candidate does, it carries and pulls the down ballot candidates across the finish line. But clearly, there's something off about Herschel Walker. Because 2022 in many ways was still a good year for Republicans, at least on the baseline front. It was not at all what they had expected, and by no means would I say this was a red wave. In fact, I would say Democrats did significantly better than expected, but it was all in relation to expectations. And knowing that Democrats are on track to lose the House, if this was 2020, the entire narrative would be very different. Given that Republicans are on track to win the House popular vote, if this was 2020, the narrative would be very different. Our elections are defined by the expectations that we have for them. But at the same time, we cannot deny that an improvement in the Senate is a very good result for Democrats. But the reason why I point out that it was at least somewhat of a good night for Republicans is because, quite frankly, we just saw Brian Kemp win in a swing state by 8 points, which means that Herschel Walker should have been able to win outright because Brian Kemp was able to do so. But it is clear, Walker does not match Brian Kemp when it comes down to winning in the Atlanta metro area. Brian Kemp and Herschel Walker nearly matched in a lot of the southern counties in Georgia. You can see that they're nearing 80, 90, 100% of the same votes voting for Walker and Kemp. Not a lot of drop-off in the southern region, in the non-urban areas. In the rural areas, Walker did, quite frankly, phenomenally. Oh my gosh, I can't speak today. But in the Atlanta metro area, that's where he really fell off. You can see that in the heart of Atlanta, Herschel Walker received 76% of the same amount of votes that Brian Kemp did. When you look at these counties, we can compare the margins. Let's head back over to our Georgia governor's race because it tells you a lot as to why this runoff is going to go blue, or at least why I personally would bet on it going blue at this point. You take DeKalb County. Stacey Abrams won 81% of the vote. Brian Kemp received 18%. How much did Walker receive? Just 14% to Warnock's 84%. In neighboring Fulton County, 74% to 25% in the Senate race. In the governor's race, it was just 69 to 31. These minuscule seeming improvements in percentage made all the difference for Brian Kemp. Because again, in that southern and rural region, they were performing even. If they were performing even in the Atlanta metro area, Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams, we wouldn't have a victor. We would be heading into a runoff election in the governor's race. But it was because Brian Kemp was able to make up this margin, what seems to be, 6 points, was the difference between 127,000 votes and just 102,000 votes. Or it was the difference of 41,000 votes for Walker, for Brian Kemp getting 54,000 votes. 13,000 people here ranked Brian Kemp over Stacey Abrams, but Raphael Warnock over Herschel Walker. And that's the problem that ultimately lies for Walker. When he is on an individualized ticket, he loses. He already would have lost this race outright, and it's better news, honestly, for Democrats looking back at the 2020 Senate elections. Because in the initial election between Warnock, Loeffler, Collins, and others, Warnock and the Democrats combined to a vote of 48%. The Republicans combined to a vote of 48.4%. Point being, Republicans won more vote in the initial election than the Democrats did. And it meant that if that election was held then, the Democrats would have lost. But that's not what happened in the state of Georgia because they have that runoff system, which is backfiring on Republicans here. You can see that the runoff election in Georgia was what led to Warnock's victory because it was Donald Trump who carried many of those Republicans across the finish line. You're starting to see, or at least hopefully, where this down ballot effect is very, very clear. Though Donald Trump lost in the presidential race, by the time we reach January, the Democrats performed better than they did on election night. And the only reason why that happened is because Donald Trump was not on the ballot. If he was on the ballot again, and voters had an opportunity to vote on that election again, let's say it went to a runoff on the presidential level, then it's very possible that Trump could have won it. But that's not what happened. Donald Trump was not on the ballot, but when he was on the ballot, you found that Republicans not only did well, but they flipped 15 seats in the House of Representatives. There is a very clear understanding that the down ballot ramifications for Democrats were super significant following 2020. And there was one common denominator between the 2016 victories in Congress and the 2020 victories in Congress, and it was Donald Trump being on the ballot. So when I look back at Georgia, I am often reminded that in the initial election, Democrats actually performed worse. And if that's the case, Warnock has nothing to worry about. I understand the concern about Democrats not turning out because they have already won the Senate. But technically speaking, why would they have turned out an election that was going to be a blowout? Look at 2014. Look at 2010. Look what happens when Democrats aren't enthusiastic about their president and decide to just not vote. That's what happened in those midterm elections, and Democrats were easily defeated. But not this time. This time, a lot is on the line. And without Brian Kemp being on the ballot, I do not see a pathway forward for Herschel Walker easily. That delta was very, very real. And it might be the exact reason as to why Walker and Warnock are going to be in a very competitive race, but why Warnock ends up winning. Looking at the polling numbers as well, I will be very interested to see what the polling numbers actually tell us. In 2021, they were off by less than a point. This time around, they said Kemp would receive 52. What did he receive? 53.4. They said Abrams would win 44.4. What did she get? 45.8. Polling perfect in the governor's race. When it comes down to the Senate race, they said Walker would receive 48, Warnock would receive 47. Flip those numbers and you've got a similar number, and accurate depiction. 49% for Warnock, Walker 49% as well. You're off by at most 2 points. The polling in Georgia is very, very accurate, and it's something that personally I'm very happy to trust. It was right in 2016, it was right in 2018, it was right in 2020, it was right in 2021, and now it's been right again in 2022. We're heading into this runoff with full steam. I guarantee you there will be a lot of polls out of the race, and I personally believe that Raphael Warnock will continue to be the next senator from the state of Georgia. He will go on to serve a 6-year term until 2028. The next time that Republicans can try to crack in at Georgia in a Senate race will be Jon Ossoff's race in 2026. And that's just from a general understanding of where we are nationally, where Democrats are, where Republicans are, and also on that initial argument about a lack of enthusiasm. How convincing will it be to Republicans to turn out in this election? Because quite frankly, the line of messaging that has been so at least seemingly effective in some of these races is that this one individual race will make or break the Senate majority. And every single swing seat candidate can say that because they are in a 50-50 majority. That is no longer the case. No matter what, Democrats have it outright. Republicans won't have anything to fight for. Democrats, on the other hand, have experienced 2 years of throttling and a slowed down administration by the filibuster, by rogue senators, by their own party. And they're angry. Angry enough that they saw what happened when Republicans utilized the court to their advantage. They turned out in these midterm elections, and they can guarantee you they will turn out in this runoff election unless something dramatically changes between now and January. But as we understand, Walker is a significantly worse candidate than Kemp, and it showed last Tuesday. If this was any other state, Warnock would have been elected to the Senate outright, but it's heading to a runoff election, and I can bet a similar reaction or a similar vote composition will result. Warnock narrowly wins the race, but wins the race nonetheless. The betting odds agree with me. They didn't for a while. I've pretty routinely had it in the Democratic column. Warnock wins in Georgia. And that's something that personally I would bet on for the December 6th runoff election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.